Very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. We just want to start off by reminding you of the tips to continually prevent COVID-19, and that is to wash your hands regularly with soap and water. If you don't have access to that, try and use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer throughout the day. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with any unwashed hands. And then also avoid close contact with people who are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze with a flexed elbow or tissue and throw the tissue into the bin. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces. And then also, if you can, do your part and get vaccinated. So let's get straight into our toolbox talk for this morning. Obviously, we're looking forward to the hazards presented by wet weather. We know that this is the time where we are having a lot of our rain. And so we want to find out exactly what are the dangers, what are we looking out for, and what can you as a plumber do to ensure that you are protecting yourself against such hazards. We know that most of South Africa is a summer rainfall area. So this means that during the months of November to March is where we experience most of our rainfall throughout South Africa. But the Western Cape province obviously receives most of its rainy weather during May to August. So you might have already gone through your rain fall this year already. Perhaps you're going to have a few thunder showers now and then. We do know that some of you staying there by the Cape of Storms, obviously it can happen within minutes actually down there. So please also just remember to always check your weather forecast for the day. When you are starting a project, remember to always make sure that we understand what the 7-day forecast is so that we can mitigate these hazards should we be on site. Now, for most of South Africa, we have definite rainfall patterns, and this obviously moves from west to east. That's why Cape Town will always receive their rain first, and then it moves over along to the Durban coast, obviously up through to Joburg and Botswana and Mozambique. But if you are in Joburg, if you're in Western Cape, or if you're in Durban, we do realize that the highest rainfall obviously occurs during the eastern and southern mountains of the Drakensberg. So that's from Limpopo through Mpumalanga, and then obviously KZN, and also to the northern parts of the Eastern Cape. Now, most of you would agree, we love the wet weather. We love having those beautiful storms, and it comes at sometimes an inconvenient time for us, but we still enjoy the rain. We need the rain, and obviously it's very good for our land, but sometimes it makes our job very, very difficult to do. So what are the main areas that you as plumbers should be looking out for, and what should you be doing to mitigate these hazards? Well, one of the first areas that we want to remind you of is obviously working at heights. Now, when working at heights, whether that be on a roof, a scaffold, your mobile elevated working platforms such as cherry pickers or scissors lifts, we realize that we are not actually allowed to work during inclement weather. So no work is allowed to take place if it is raining and we are working at heights, not even for a few minutes. But most of us, as soon as the rain stops, we say, well, we can continue to work. But wet weather does not necessarily mean just rain. It is also that time period where just after the rain has subsided, that every area on top of the working at heights platforms is now wet, and this creates a slippery or slip and trip surface. So if you are working on a roof, perhaps you are installing solar geysers, perhaps you are up there to do an inspection. We want to remind you that even though it is not raining, the danger is still left over. So it's not as dangerous as obviously when it is raining, but it is just as dangerous if there's a lot of rain or wet left on that roof. So one thing, if you are in construction, there will be no work during periods of inclement weather, and that would include things such as high wind. So if you are on a construction site, generally speaking, it's 30 kilometers per hour is the wind ratio where we stop all work. But this is just a guide. So please take a look at the safety specification for that site. They will generally tell you that during these periods of high wind, you are not allowed to work at heights. Just take a look at the crane. If the crane is moving, that means the wind is not too bad. So if the crane is allowed to work, generally speaking, you should be able to work. But again, it is a guide. What we normally do on construction sites, if we see the crane stop moving, then we realize that the winds are too high when working at heights. And this is generally our point of call when working at heights on a site. If there is no crane, then obviously you will need to have a wind meter, specifically in areas in South Africa where it is very windy. This is a legal requirement that when you are working at heights, you should have a wind meter taking wind patterns or even the wind kilometers throughout the duration of the day. The one thing we want to do is always rely on our risk assessment when working in dangerous conditions. If our risk assessment expressly tells us that zero work is to be done at a certain kilometers per hour wind, this is going to pick up perhaps a storm. We also want to take cognizance of the fact that down in Cape Town, storms can arise within minutes. And so there we also want to ensure that when we're on a roof, if we see a storm coming up, we need to pack up as quickly as possible and wait it out. Now, again, this might be a little bit inconvenient to you, and we understand that you need to get your work done. A lot of you are on a time schedule, and you want to have the job done as good as possible, as quickly as possible, to the satisfaction of your customer. But at the same time, in occupational health and safety, we want to keep you safe. We want to keep your employees safe. And we are hoping that incidents and accidents that occur every single day in the construction industry, persons falling from heights, slipping on a wet roof and falling to a lower level, does not occur. And the only way to do that is by getting you in a behavioral-based safety mind, in a risk-based thinking mindset, where you are constantly looking out for these types of hazards and mitigating them. Now, this does not mean that you don't have to work. It just means that you might need to stop work temporarily and then make it safe for yourself to work afterwards. Again, working at heights is such a huge hazard when working on sites. And for you as plumbers, it is a high risk even when there is no rain. But please remember, if you are going to be using scaffolding, according to your SANS 1885, section 12.5, a competent person appointed as a scaffolding inspector will obviously inspect all scaffolding as soon as it's been built. If any alterations have been done, if any modifications have been done, or at least every 7 days. If you are not sure whether that scaffold has been inspected, because you are not the person in charge of the scaffold, or you are not the contractor who is responsible for erecting the scaffolding or inspecting the scaffolding, what you need to do is just go to the access point of that scaffold, look for a green tag, that's the green safety use tag, and just take a look either underneath the tag or behind the tag. It will give you the date that that scaffolding was inspected. Now, if you've had rain yesterday, obviously you need to have had that scaffolding inspected this morning before any person is allowed on it. If you're not sure, just go and take a look at that date. If you see the date is not the 16th of November, 2021, that it has been inspected, you are not allowed to climb onto that scaffold. That's obviously if there has been inclement weather in the past few days. But every 7 days, that scaffolding should be re-inspected. Now, another serious or dangerous area for many plumbers is working in storm drains, and water drains can rise pretty quickly and unexpectedly. And so this becomes a potential hazard that is always unforeseen. When working in storm drains, we often don't realize that the water that's inside there can either rise pretty quickly if there's been a storm in the area, or even in a surrounding area. So even though we might not have had wet weather in our area, these storm drains are often connected and they move through urban areas. But if there has been rain in the immediate area, there is a very big possibility for these storm drains to get flooded. Now, flowing water is very powerful. It can knock you over, even if it is shallow. So storm water also contains pollutants, including dangerous chemicals, as well as disease-causing bacteria. So wet weather brings with it not just slippery surfaces, not just flooding. In fact, if you think about the power tools that you have to use as a plumber, water and electricity do not mix. And so these are the main hazards that we sometimes think of. But what about the additional hazards, such as what water is actually bringing to our working environment? Not just in terms of slipping, tripping, electrocution, and flooding, but what about the dangerous chemicals that it might bring along with it, that your clients have used to unblock their storm drains, or that they have used to unblock any waste pipes? perhaps the diseases that it is carrying in that water as well. And so when we look at health and safety, we do not want to forget about health. Many of us focus purely on the safety aspect, but never forget that your health is also very important to you and your employer, because a healthy employee is obviously at work. An unhealthy employee misses work. And so health and safety is more productive, because if you're healthy, you are at work, you're obviously working a lot better. And so employers, if you're listening in, please keep your employees healthy. You have them for a lot longer. Another area in which plumbers need to be careful, especially when it comes to raining or very wet weather coming up for the rainy season, is in excavations. And here we want to take a look at your construction regulations, section 13. All excavations must be on a register. They must be inspected daily before any work commences in there and after inclement weather. Well, what does that mean? Does inclement weather supersede daily? Yes, it does. Which means if you've gotten to site already, your excavation supervisor has gone out and they've inspected that excavation to check that it is safe to access, and then you get rain. When must you inspect it? Immediately after that rain, even if you've inspected it this morning. And so the requirement or the law there is to make sure you've inspected it this morning and every single morning or during the day, depending on when you're going to access that excavation, and immediately after inclement weather. And this can only be done by the appointed competent person, and he is the person or she is the person that is going to declare that this is safe, and they are going to note all of their findings down in a register. So if you are not appointed and if you are not competent as an excavation supervisor or inspector, please remember, if you climb into it and say, you've checked it, you feel safe, it is not allowed. You have to have that excavation inspector or supervisor out to do that. Now, we just want to remind you of a case study that happened last year. We did have this in one of our toolbox talks, but we thought it only necessary to bring it up again, specifically speaking about wet weather and the dangers that wet weather brings for many of you as employees, for companies, for your clients, but specifically speaking about others who may be affected by your work. And this is a very important one. And the reason why we say this is many of you are working towards occupational health and safety within your own company. You are forced to do it by some safety officers on site. You are monitored, and health and safety is enforced by the client or the principal contractor on site. Or perhaps you have a very good occupational health and safety management system that drives you as a company. Whatever the case, and however you are working, you have some sort of a safety mindset. But what about those around our working environment? What about those who perhaps are affected by the work that we do, that may lose their lives because of the negligence we show as contractors? Well, let us take a look at what happened. This was a year ago, the 23rd of November, 2020. Another young boy died after falling in a trench in Hammanskraal. Now, the city of Tshwane is obviously to take legal action against the contractor after a boy drowns in a water-filled trench. Now, they obviously are saying access to construction areas and access barriers, protecting those who are around these areas that you're working in from gaining access to your specific areas. And this is true. Access is extremely important. Now, you might not think that access or barricading and wet weather are working in hand. So let's take a look at what happened, what was the issue, and how can you mitigate this potential problem from occurring again. Now, the Tshwane Mayor Randall Williams announced on Monday that another boy had drowned in the township. This time it was Extension 10, Ward 49. And this was on Saturday afternoon. 3 boys, 2 10-year-olds and 1 9-year-old were found dead in an under construction stormwater trench in Tambo Extension 1 near the traffic department in Hammanskraal. Just going to reread that. 3 boys, 2 10-year-olds and 1 9-year-old were found dead in an under construction stormwater trench in Tambo Extension 1. Legal action will be pursued by the city of Tshwane after a fourth boy drowned in Hammanskraal. So 3 had already drowned. And then on that Saturday, after some rain again, another boy drowned in a trench that was dug by an external contractor working on a housing project. Why are these things constantly happening? Why did it take 3 boys to die and then another boy to die, a fourth one who drowned again because of negligence on behalf of the contractor? You see, we might want to protect ourselves. All those contractors went home that weekend safe. They felt that they were safe. But did they ensure the safety of those who might be affected by the work that they were doing? Well, the storm that happened the Friday just before that blew some barricades into the site, which the young boys were then using to swim and play within the trench. And it is believed that these children drowned. But just 2 days later, tragedy struck again as 2 young boys sent out to do shopping fell into a trench. And unfortunately, that one boy drowned. This means 4 in total. 4 young boys died because of negligence on a contractor's side. Now, you'll notice exactly what the mayor said, that he considers this to be negligence on the contractor's part, as it is clearly the contractor who did not take the necessary precautions to ensure that there was adequate access control to the site. Now, all of us can say, well, it's the principal contractor, it's the client who's responsible, but who is creating the hazard? If you as the plumber are a contractor on site and you are creating the hazard, you're the one digging the trench, you're the one digging the excavation, then you are the one responsible for any person who gets injured, even if they overcome some of your safety barriers. So please remember that even though they do something wrong, if you are the one who created the hazard, you are still held accountable. Now you might think, well, that's a bit unfair. Well, the judicial system and the legal side states that you are still the person who created that hazard. And ultimately, you are the one who is responsible for the health and safety of that specific task. And so, although you might not be directly liable, you are negligible by fault. And what this means is it is indirect liability. So yes, you will not be jailed for manslaughter, but you might go to jail for a very long time, or have your company closed, or receive a very big fine that could close down your company. Why would any of us want to risk that from happening? The biggest part, though, was 3 boys and a fourth one had to lose their life. So aside from the fine, aside from jail time, aside from the cost to our company, what about the cost of life? Those 3 young men who will never grow up again. Again, I just want to remind you what the mayor said. I consider this to be negligence on the contractor's part, as it is clear that the contractor did not take the necessary precautions to ensure that there was adequate access control on the site. Wherever we discover instances of poor safety or failures to adequately secure sites, the city will deal with contractors harshly. And this has been happening over the past year. If you've not perhaps noticed it, but a lot more Department of Labor inspectors are out monitoring, inspecting, and checking to see whether companies have their health and safety in place. And when it comes to wet weather, these hazards are real. They might even create a hazard when we are not on site that could cost the life of others. And so we know that that was quite a hectic Toolbox Talk this morning. We obviously want to remind ourselves of the real dangers that are existing. And these case studies help us to really understand that it's not just our lives who are at stake. It's not just our employees' lives or their health that is at stake. There is a very big potential and possibility that we could even affect the lives of those around us. Now, next week, we are going to consider medicals. What type of medicals do you need within the construction industry? If you are not working in construction, do you still need a medical for your staff? What is the requirement according to law? When is it required that you have to put your staff on medical surveillance? And what else must you do when you do have a medical for your staff? And finally, we'll end the month on, can you do your own safety part 2? So just the safety thought for this week is to remember your ABCs. Always be careful, not just for yourself, not just for those around you, but any other person who may be affected by the task that you are performing. As a reminder, if you haven't done the COVID compliance officers courses yet, you can find that on the ohss.co.za website. You can get in contact with us, send us a WhatsApp on 071-875-2070, or send us an email at chris@ohss.co.za, and we'll put you in touch with those links. Don't forget, at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, the Education Through a Conversation podcast for Man in the Van. That is on various different apps that you can find us on. maninthevan.co.za, Apple Podcasts, Player FM, Iono, Spotify, Pocket Casts, as well as on the new app Plumber. Then just a final reminder to please continually prevent COVID-19 by following these few steps. If you did miss anything, or if I cut off short and you want more information on any of this topics that we did discuss, please reach out to us and we'll be sure to share our slideshow with you. But obviously, as Kareem mentioned, these Toolbox Talks are recorded. They are placed on the LMS system, and you can also go onto the IOPSA YouTube channel and find these available there as well. Thank you very much.